Hello, I'm Tyson, and I'm going to be covering Interpersonal Context in American Beauty, directed by Sam Mendes. It's a wonderful film, and if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend you go see it because I might spoil some things for you. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what the movie's about. It's about a couple of suburban families and their relationships of friendships and wives and husbands and different kind of relationships and the communications that they have. It's in a suburbia, and a lot of the happiness that they pretend to have isn't actually what they feel. And people feel this pressure to give an air of success even when there are really, really bad things going on in your family. No one's getting along, but it's all about keeping up that happy attitude. Now, the first relationship I want to talk about is one of two girls. One is named Jane, and one is named Angela. Jane is the daughter of the main character Lester, and she's this typical rebellious teenager in her rebellious years, and they're both 17, 18. They're in high school together. Now, first I want to talk about what a friendship is. A friendship is an optional relationship you can have to offer support. Now, not all dyads can count as friendships. Some of them are manipulative or not supportive at all, such as this one. There are many types of friendships, short-term versus long-term. This is obviously going to be short-term because it ends by the end of the movie. Task-oriented versus maintenance-oriented. Maintenance-oriented meaning they actually care about each other and support each other. Task-oriented meaning, oh, we go to the same school, we might as well be friends. There's a lot of debate between low disclosure and high disclosure between the two people, and between Jane and Angela. Jane doesn't want to disclose a lot of information, but Angela's all for it, and that creates a lot of conflict and expectancy violation. There's actually this really great scene with expectancy violation where Angela discloses to Jane all about her previous boyfriends and lovers, but Jane doesn't want to talk about her new boyfriend, Ricky. So Angela is just like, what? Why don't you want to talk about it? I tell you about every single detail of all the guys I slept with. And Angela's expectancy that Jane is like her hurts her in the long run, and that's actually one of the first times where the relationship really starts to fall apart. There's definitely a low obligation. They don't go out of their way to help each other, and there's infrequent contact throughout the film and presumably through their lives. And this is just a short little list of how friends should help each other, and honestly, they're not the best examples. They don't help each other. They don't treat each other with very much respect. And the biggest thing, they don't really apologize at the very end, which really keeps them from mending their relationship. Next, we're going to talk about intimate relationships. And there are a lot of different types of intimate relationships, and there are different methods you can use to like achieve intimacy, and those would be, um, well, first let's look at Lester and Carolyn. Lester and Carolyn are Jane's parents, and there are four ways you can achieve intimacy in an intimate relationship. You can have emotional intimacy, which is like sharing important thoughts and feelings. There's physical intimacy, coming actually close, touching each other, kissing, hugging, just being comfortable around each other. There's intellectual basis of it, which is like sharing ideas and opinions, important ones specifically. And then there's that shared narrative idea again, where they have this history together, where they can look back nostalgically almost and bond through their experience. Lester and Carolyn have the shared activities of caring for their daughter Jane, but their emotional, physical, and intellectual levels aren't so hot right now. And as a spouse relationship or a friendship, they have a very undifferentiated relationship, which means that they have a low level of uh, a low level of instrumentality and expressiveness. So it's like they don't really have too many goals that they're setting out, and they don't really talk too much about their feelings. But when they do get a little bit heated and start talking about their feelings, it is interesting because Lester seems to take on a more feminine linguistic role, whereas Carolyn takes on a more masculine one. And she definitely kind of feels like the breadwinner, especially when um, Lester quits his job. But it's interesting because she always paints Lester to be the bad guy, but Jane sees them both as insane. So it's really all about perspective. Who's being more masculine, who's feminine. It often changes back and forth, and we'll talk more about that when we discuss chaotic families. And just like friendships, you have to maintain your intimate relationships. One is by having positivity, but the positivity that these two people have isn't actually positive. It's very fake and phony and sarcastic, which doesn't help their relationship at all. There's not very much openness, especially when they both kind of start cheating on each other. More so Carolyn. Carolyn starts cheating and doing things behind Lester's back. Lester never cheats until he discovers that Carolyn is cheating. They don't assure each other that they're worthy of anything at all. In fact, they actually go out of their way to put each other down. And when Carolyn does offer compliments, they're usually backhanded. Like there's one time when she says to Jane, "Oh, I was watching you really closely and you didn't mess up once." It doesn't really have a good positive connotation. And again, sharing tasks. And they do share tasks, but as their daughter gets older and more independent, they have less in common. And Jane was kind of what was holding their marriage together. And they don't really have any friends. They have fake friends, especially Carolyn. But Lester's best friend is the 18-year-old who sells drugs next door. Speaking of which, he and Jane are an item, apparently, because they directly juxtapose the relationship between Lester and Carolyn. They're actually an androgynous relationship, which means high instrumentality and high emotions. They're very open with their discussions, and it's a very healthy relationship. They have a very good relationship commitment, and there's a really good scene where Ricky has a camera. There it is. He loves filming beautiful things. It's one of his favorite things to do. He always has a camera. But then Jane says, "I don't want you to film me anymore," and he immediately puts it away. And that's showing that he's willing to give up his favorite thing to keep their relationship going. And they have minimal expectancy violations, whereas Angela had a lot because they were such different people. Jane and Ricky have a lot in common, so they don't have to worry about having expectancy violations. And there's also this interesting nonverbal communication factor concerning the distance between them. At the beginning of the movie, they have a very public, personal face, whereas toward the end, they get closer and closer until finally, in the scene with the TV, they are sitting shoulder to shoulder, and they end up holding hands and kissing. It's kind of how most relationships evolve. You get closer and closer, literally and mentally. Communication in families. This is the big one in this movie. There are two different types of families, and they're literally complete opposites. Neither of them have many good redeeming qualities, though. First is the Burnham family, and they are a typical example of that laissez-faire family. If you have conformity, and laissez-faire is basically a conformity orientation versus a conversation orientation. So if you have a low conformity and a low conversation, which means low openness of like topics, then you're gonna have a laissez-faire. It's very, very free to do whatever you want, and not many of the people care. They're a very disengaged family. As you can see from the picture, they're all sitting very far apart, and there's not very much cohesion. And when there is cohesion, they usually put it off until later when it kind of blows up. And this scene at the dining room table is a really good example of a disengaged family. Not only is the physical distance of the three people does that show their miscommunications, but Lester awkwardly asks, "So how was school?" But he only does that so that he can start off saying, "Well, my day sucked. They hired this guy named Brad," and then the daughter was like, "I don't really care." And Lester has that expectancy violation once again. And Jane says, "Well, what do you expect? You can't all of a sudden be best friends just because you had a bad day. We've barely spoken to each other in months." So that's kind of interesting. We're looking at one dyad in a family as a friendship. And there's the chaotic family. There's too much adaptability, which means there's usually a toss-up between who's in charge. Jane sees the toss-up happening between the mom and her mom and her dad, but often she feels like she's the mature one. So it's up in the air who's in charge at any time. In this scene, all of the characters have these sort of whims and impulsively deciding to do things. Like Carolyn decides to impulsively go shoot guns at a driving range or a shooting range, and then Lester decides to get a 1973 Firebird. And this sort of spontaneity is kind of a competition between the two people, and it's like threatening power. Ironically, this is the first time that they've actually been this attracted to each other. But then Carolyn cares more about the couch and her things than she does about rekindling her relationship when Lester almost spills beer on the couch. And then there's the proximity between them. They're never really close together. The paralanguage, there's a lot of sarcasm, which puts up this false front of happiness when really there's a meaning of sadness or hatred or disgust underneath. And the other family is Ricky's family, which is Fitz's family. The dad is an ex-colonel. His name is Frank, and he's a very authoritarian parent. They have low conversation orientation, but high conformity orientation, which makes them a very protective family. While that may sound like a good thing, there are a lot of cons to it. They become very enmeshed. There's too much cohesion and tension. Ricky can't wait to get out of the house because his father might beat him at any time. It's a very rigid family. There's not enough adaptability. For example, there's this scene where Frank discovers that Ricky had been tampering with his gun cabinet, and he was worried that, or he actually jumps to the conclusion that Ricky was trying to steal money to buy drugs. But then he immediately went into his room and hit him 3 times before Ricky was able to say, "I just wanted to show my girlfriend your plate." So him jumping to the conclusion shows the lack of communication that they have, the low conversation orientation. And if he'd used his perception checking skills, he would have been able to see that Ricky was just showing him his girlfriend's plate. But instead of saying, "Oh, it was just a misunderstanding," Frank says, "This is for your own good. Boy, you have no respect for other people's things," and Ricky is always respectful to him, even though he can't wait to get out of there. And there's a lot of non-verbal communication. As you can see, the way they're sitting on the couch, none of them are touching. All of them have a very upright posture. It's a very rigid, there's too much cohesion and tension. So that's American Beauty and all of the relationships and contexts in it. I hope you enjoyed this lecture and have a good night. Thank you.